Good morning, everybody. First of all, can you all hear me? Can you all see me? Feel free to please unmute and just sort of talk throughout this. But yes, can you all hear me? Brilliant. I see a couple of yeses in chat. Great. Welcome to this morning's workshop. This is Build and Deploy an Interactive Python Data App with Streamlit. Welcome. I'm Fergus Cooper in the Oxford Research Software Engineering Group. And I put together this workshop on Streamlit, which is a very straightforward and easy way to get something up and running, sharing data apps with the world. And so what I want to do is this morning take us through a complete process from start to finish, building a hopefully useful data app that we can then share with the world and get what we're doing out there. And really the emphasis is on how simple and straightforward it can be to get something interactive that you can send someone a link to, and it'll work on a desktop, it'll work on a mobile, and it will just hopefully be a quick and easy win for sharing your work with the world. That is the plan. So to start, I'm going to put a link in the chat, which hopefully you should all see. This is the link to the course website. And the course website is going to have essentially a bit of a walkthrough. I'll show you that in a minute. And without further ado, I think we'll get going. So what I'm going to do first is share my screen. Okay, does everyone see the workshop website? Can't see the chat at the moment, so someone shout if the screen sharing is working all right.
Yep, all good.
Okay, excellent. Well, so this is the workshop website. If you go to that web address, it might look slightly different for you. You can toggle light mode, dark mode. I'll keep it on dark mode for today. And yeah, so what I want to start off with is just very quickly talk about Streamlit. They make the claim that it's the fastest way to build and share data apps. And I think they might actually be right. It's something that's very trivial to set up. And we can create high quality, responsive, interactive apps to showcase data or other visualizations in as little as a few hours. We have the full power of Python behind us. So really what we can do with it is pretty much limitless. And I'm not, just a disclaimer, I'm not affiliated with Streamlit in any way. I just think it's a great tool. I've used it before. And I think it's a tool that more people ought to know about. So that's the quick spiel. I've put on the homepage here a number of useful links. I'll just go through each one of those in turn really quickly. So the first one is the Streamlit homepage. So you can go here and just get a quick flavor. The next one is the Streamlit gallery. I'm not suggesting that you necessarily exhaustively look through this right now, but if you want at some point, you can have a quick look through the gallery, and there are a number of popular apps that you can go and have a look at, see them in action, and see the kinds of things that are possible with Streamlit. The next one is the documentation. We'll be probably looking at that a fair amount over the course of the morning. The next one is the full API reference. So this obviously just allows you to dig a little bit deeper in and see all of the precise options that you have to play with. And finally, we have a cheat sheet, and the cheat sheet is itself actually a Streamlit app. And so with this cheat sheet, which is very useful, you can see a quick kind of top level overview of a number of things. So don't worry about all of those for now, but if you need one of those links throughout the workshop, just bear in mind that I've put these useful links on the website homepage. That brings me onto the schedule for today. What you can see is we have a number of steps that we're going to go through. There are 6 steps in total. And so we'll be working through those together. And there'll be times during that where we'll be heading off potentially into breakout rooms to work on things, to actually write some code and to get our apps up and running. The one thing I will say before we start is there's a tiny bit of confusion about the length of the workshop. I noticed this morning on the SeptembRSE schedule that we are listed as being from 10 o'clock to 1 p.m., which is absolutely fine. However, when my workshop was accepted, I was told that it could only be 2 hours long. So I've prepared something that I thought was going to be roughly 2 hours worth of material. So if we finish a little bit early, we finish a little bit early. Hopefully that's okay with everyone. The first thing we're going to do is very quickly look at some prerequisites. So they're not very many and they're not very onerous, but I want to make sure that everyone is set up and running. And it will give us just the first opportunity to check that the breakout rooms and things are working as intended. So I'm going to click through to prerequisites, and I'm just going to talk through this first of all. We need to have Python installed, specifically Python at least version 3.6. And we can check that with typing Python -- version. And if you see a version 2, then try Python 3 -- version. And if you haven't installed Python yet, we'll have a few minutes in a breakout room just to make sure everyone's got everything installed. And just a quick note, if you are using Windows, make sure it'll help later. Make sure you click the add to path option when you're installing Python. Secondly, we'll need a text editor. We'll need Git, and you might want to use your favorite Git GUI application if you so desire, but it's not necessary as long as you have Git installed and you're happy using that on the command line. And finally, we're going to be using 2 services today. One of them is GitHub, and one of them is Heroku. And Heroku is a cloud platform for hosting apps, and we'll be using that today to host our apps. And so we need to make sure that we have an account on Heroku. It's completely free, and they have a quite generous free tier. So these are the prerequisites for the course today. So what I'm going to do is stop sharing my screen for a second. Don't know why that button wasn't working. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to suggest that we go out into some breakout rooms, and I'll just jump into each breakout room in turn and just verify that everyone's got everything set up and running and working, and hopefully give you all a chance to meet each other in slightly smaller groups. What I'm going to do now is open breakout rooms. There are 6 in total. We don't have to use all 6 by any means, but I suggest that we get sort of 3 to 5 people in each breakout room, and then I'll just hop around and we'll just check that everyone is set up with everything that they need for the course. Okay, any questions about anything so far? Okay, I see a message from Jez saying Zoom crashes a lot, so feel free to keep rejoining if necessary. Okay, it looks to me as though no one's actually joined a breakout room. Do people have the option to do that? Okay, yep, no, it looks like it. So ideally, if we could all join breakout rooms, if some people don't have the option to join a breakout room, that's absolutely fine. We can use this main room as well as a breakout room. But I think it might be useful to get people into breakout rooms for the exercises.
I don't seem to have an option to join a breakout room.
Okay, that's not a problem. In that case, yeah, anyone who doesn't have that option will just sit in the main room and just treat that as a breakout room. But everyone who can join a breakout room, I suggest we do so, because we will be spending a bit of time this morning actually writing some code. And it's always nice to do that in small groups so that we can just sort of chat and ask each other about any problems that we might be encountering. Okay, so everyone who's still in the main room, do you think you've got all of the prerequisites set up? Are there any problems with anything so far?
I just need to sort out the Heroku thing. Nearly there with that.
Okay, perfect. I'm just going to jump into each of the breakout rooms and ask the same question to everyone there. So bear with me a second. Okay, so I've just closed the breakout room, so everyone should be rejoining the main room shortly. It sounds as though everyone so far that I've heard from has got all of the tools, apart from potentially just waiting on Heroku to get that set up, but that's absolutely fine. We won't be using that for a little while. So we'll just wait another 20 seconds for everyone to rejoin this main room. Okay, everyone, welcome back to the main room. So I think we are at the point where everyone has the prerequisites, with the possible exception of a few people still getting set up with Heroku, but that's fine. We won't be using Heroku for a little while yet. The main ones, as long as everyone's got Git and GitHub set up and Python installed, we should be good to go. So I'm going to give a quick overview of what we're going to do to build the first app, and then I'm going to go through and actually do it live screen sharing. Hopefully nothing will go wrong with that. And then we'll just have, once we've got to the point where we've got a first app up and running, or I've got a first app up and running, we'll then have another few minutes in the breakout rooms to just get up to that stage. And that will at least, at the end of the next section, building the first kind of trivial app, we will then just know for sure that everyone has got everything working and installed correctly. So let me just very quickly share my screen. And so we're going to just click next and look at building a first app. So I've got all of the instructions in here for you to follow in a minute, but very quickly, just looking at the contents, we're just going to create a GitHub repository and clone that. We're going to set up a Python virtual environment, and we're going to install all of the required Python packages that we're going to be using this morning. And then we're going to build and run a basic Streamlit app. And we're going to run that at the in the first instance, just locally in our web browsers and check that it's working. And I really do want to just take as long as it takes to get everyone up to the point where they've got their first basic app running locally in their web browser. And hopefully once everyone's up to that point, we'll all be where we need to be. Okay, so without further ado, what I'm going to do is go over to my GitHub, and I'm going to create a new repository. And I think I'm going to call it something like Streamlit Workshop. We'll need to keep the repositories public for today. The public is going to be important so that we can make use of the Heroku free tier for hosting our apps later. If you would like to not have the repository public, that's fine. You can keep it private. It's just that you won't be able to do the very final step, which is then hosting it with Heroku on their free tier. And just for convenience, I'm going to add a README. I'm going to add a git ignore for Python. And I'm going to add a license. I'll add the MIT license to my repository. You can use your license of preference. So I'll just create that. Okay, and I'm just going to clone this. So bear with me just a second. Okay, and then I'm going to open that in, well, in fact, no, now that I've cloned that repository, let's just go into there, Streamlit Workshop, and I'll just double check the order in which I said we were going to do things. But I think the next thing is to set up a Python virtual environment. So I don't know how confident everyone is on this call in terms of using Python and using Python virtual environments, but there'll be plenty of time to go through and just check that everyone has got that set up when we go into the breakout rooms. But for now, I'm going to do it. If you're using something other than Linux or Mac, it will look slightly different. But again, I've put the instructions in the website. So for me, I'm going to just create a quick virtual environment. And once you've activated the virtual environment, you should have some kind of indication that that has worked appropriately. And then we're just going to update what we need to update. So we want to update the pip setup tools and wheel packages. So again, I've put the instructions for that. That's just to make sure that everything installs okay. And then what we're going to do is install all of the Python libraries that we're going to be using today. Now I've created this list here, and we're going to put it in a requirements.txt. The reason we're going to use a requirements.txt specifically is that when we come later to deploy our app to Heroku, the requirements.txt is a format that Heroku will just natively work with. And so the installation of all of the dependencies for our app will work kind of as magic, assuming we've put them all in the requirements.txt. So I'm just going to create a requirements.txt. I'm actually just going to, first of all, open this in VS Code. And then let's create a new file, call it requirements. Hopefully I've spelled that correctly, requirements.txt. And I'm just going to copy this list of 5 Python modules into this requirements.txt, save that. And then following the next instruction on here, we're just going to then install all of those requirements. So back to my terminal. And it's going to go through and install these things. Some of them are fairly big. So we're actually going to use SciPy today for some aspects of the course. And SciPy might take a minute or so to install. But we'll just sit here and wait for that to happen. Okay, done already. So all of the requirements are hopefully now installed. And so now we're going to actually go on to the part about building a basic Streamlit app. Now, a basic Streamlit app, the beauty of Streamlit is that it is just a simple Python file. It's just one Python file, and there's essentially 0 boilerplate. So as you can see, this code block here is an entire Streamlit app, albeit a very basic one. So all we're going to do is create an empty Python file. I'm going to call it just app.py, and then I'm going to copy the contents of this code block. So if I go back to my text editor, just going to create a new file called, well, paste in the contents here, and save this as app.py. So we should now have a file app.py in the base directory of our cloned Git repository. And then we're just going to double check that this is working. So all I'm going to do is now run this Streamlit app. So from the terminal, I'm going to simply type Streamlit, which should now exist in your path because we've installed Streamlit with the requirements.txt that we just installed, those 5 modules. Streamlit run app.py. When I Streamlit run app.py, it should automatically open the app in your web browser. If it doesn't automatically open in your web browser, it does give an address here, a localhost address, and then you can just copy and paste that into your browser. But it's opened it in the browser, and I have this app that's not doing anything, but says my first Streamlit app. And you should know that it's definitely working. There should be a button on the right-hand side here that has various options in it. So this is the very first basic Streamlit app. What I'm going to suggest now is that I'll stop sharing screen for a second. For some reason, the stop share button takes a few clicks, at least on Linux. Okay, so I've just gone through that process of creating a Git repository, checking it out, installing all of the dependencies, and then creating a first app that then opened in the browser. What I want to suggest now is that I open the breakout rooms and everyone jumps into a breakout room and just follows through those steps. And I want everyone ideally to get up to this step of having a Streamlit app running in the browser, because then I'll know for sure that we've got no problems in terms of Python versions or any problems kind of using the tools that we'll be building on later. Okay, so I'll open the breakout rooms. And first of all, I mean, if anyone has any questions so far, now would be a good time. Okay, yeah, so Martin, no problem at all. Yeah, some Zoom clients don't seem to have the breakout rooms option. For some reason, I've encountered this before, so we'll just treat this main room as if it were one of the breakout rooms. But you'll say your app is up working fine, as expected. That's excellent. Okay, it doesn't sound as though there's any questions popping up yet in the main room, so I'm just going to go through and jump into each of the 3 breakout rooms that are in use. And I'll be back here in a few minutes. Okay, hi everyone back in the main room. How's it going so far? Everyone up and running? Great. So there are a couple of teething troubles in the other breakout room, so I'm just going to give it another couple of mins before pulling everyone back in. But it sounds like with very few exceptions, everyone is up and running, which is good. Okay, I think we'll assume that everyone's had enough time to get set up now. So I'm just going to close the breakout rooms. Okay, I think we're just waiting for one more person from room 2. Jez, did you get things sorted in the end?
I think we're nearly there.
Okay. I think, yeah, so is anyone still not at the point where they've got an app on the screen, apart from possibly Jez, who's got a specific issue to work through? No? Okay, great. Sounds as though that's all gone very well. So in that case, what we're going to do is go on to the next section, and we're going to see how to start adding potentially interesting things to the Streamlit app. So we're going to go through first adding some kind of static content, and then we're going to go through adding some dynamic content. And then after the next section, I want you all to sort of work through that. And then there'll be just a little bit of time set aside, maybe sort of 10, 15 minutes, where in that time you can just sort of play around with some of the other things that are available in Streamlit just to get a feel for what is available. So I want this to kind of be a thing where it's all sort of hacking around with what we can do. And so, you know, making use of the cheat sheet to just sort of see what things other than what I've put in this particular website are available. There are lots of widgets and functions and apps that you can add. Without further ado, then, I want to share my screen again. And so now I am back over on the cheat sheet. This is a cheat sheet Streamlit app. And what we're going to look at first essentially boils down to displaying text. And so this is the kind of cheat sheet version of it. There are a number of functions, streamlit.text.markdown.latex, .write, etc. We can put in titles, headers, subheaders. We can display code and captions. That's the cheat sheet. Now let's look at sort of what that looks like. So I've gone on to now this third section, adding interactivity. And in particular, we're going to look at the first thing, static content. But before we do that, just a quick sort of note. We had to write essentially zero boilerplate to get a Streamlit app up and running. We just imported Streamlit, the module, the library, and then we wrote an app title. That was the entire app.py. So what Streamlit does is it takes your app.py file, and every time it refreshes, it just reruns the entire file. That means that essentially our entire app is inside the event loop. We, as the programmers, don't have to deal with any event loops or callbacks or anything like that. The entire app.py file will be reread from start to finish every time the Streamlit app updates. So when you click on a button, when you slide a slider, whatever it is that you do, the entire app will be reread from start to finish. That makes things really easy to get going with. It means there's very little boilerplate, and it means we can end up with quite expressive apps with very little effort whatsoever. So the first thing is displaying static content. So if I go back over to my Visual Studio Code now, I can create a variable. So in this case, it's just going to be a floating point number. And if I want to display that in my app, I can just do st.write and then a. If I save this, we should see back over in the Streamlit app, there is now a notification in the top right-hand corner telling me that the source file has changed and asking if I want to rerun or always rerun. So if I click always rerun, then it will automatically start updating. And you'll see that straight away, we've now got the value 1.23, which was our variable a, displayed in the Streamlit app. So that's using streamlit.write. And the next thing we can do is just display some kind of text. So we can use this st.write, streamlit.write, and writing st.write allows you to display all different sorts of things. You can display, for instance, pandas data frames. You can display NumPy arrays, and it will do a certain amount of automatic pretty printing for us. So Streamlit has taken it upon itself to decide on default ways that a whole variety of different data types that you might want to add to an app will look. Takes that complexity away from us. We can also just use streamlit.write to write individual strings, but slightly more powerfully than that, Streamlit offers a markdown option. So if I now copy this code block, put it in my text editor, here I'm just creating a Python string, and the string is going to contain markdown syntax. So here we should get something bold and something italic. So if I save that and go back to my Streamlit app in the browser, we'll see now that this text has been displayed, and we have the markdown has been rendered for us, and we have bold and italic. Similarly, we can go a bit further than this, and something that's going to be really useful for Streamlit apps is we can use raw string literals. So if I copy now this next section and put it in my app, for those of you unfamiliar with raw string literals in Python, we can start them with an R for raw and then 3 quote marks, and we close it with 3 quote marks as well. And then anything between that is the raw string. Now, the one slight annoyance in Python of using raw strings is that it does sort of mess things up in terms of how your Python script actually looks. Because, of course, if you indented any of these lines, it would actually change the meaning because it is literally the raw string. But with these raw strings, we can just write essentially chunks of markdown, and that will be rendered for us in the app. So if I save this and go back to the app in the browser, we'll now see we can have bullet points, and we can have anything else that you do in markdown. And so, for instance, here we've got a nice horizontal line. Markdown obviously also supports other things. So if I go back to the website now, you'll see that this next section is going to be about maths. So similar to those of you who are familiar with LaTeX, this will mean something. And if you're completely unfamiliar with LaTeX, this probably won't mean anything. But not to worry about that. The point is that if we wanted to add mathematical equations, that is given to us out of the box. And again, we can use the markdown syntax for this. So if I copy this next block, I have a mathematical equation in a Python raw string between these double $ delimiters to show that this is going to be a display equation. So if I go back to my app again, we'll now see that this equation is beautifully rendered, and it's nice. We can zoom in and it stays nice and crisp. We can also highlight things. You, to a certain extent, copy and paste these things, but not particularly well. So the double $ delimit display maths, we can also do this inline with single $. So if I get rid of the double $, save this and rerun it, you'll now see it's the fractions are slightly smaller and it's now sitting on the left rather than in the center. And that's exactly the same behavior as you'd expect from LaTeX. You can have your equations either inline or in display mode. Okay, so that is adding maths, again, provided out of the box. And then the next thing as well that we might also want to do is adding code snippets. And again, there is a method for this. If we look back over on the cheat sheet, there is an st.code. There's also the st.latex. But st.code and st.latex are both essentially wrappers around Markdown, which gives you the full set of syntax. So instead of st.code, we're just going to use the Markdown again. So back to the course website, I'm just going to copy this code block and pop that in my app. And so here we're now using our raw string again. And then inside that raw string, I'm using 3 backticks. Then I have the language here. So in this case, it's going to be C, but this works with whatever you want: Python, MATLAB, Fortran, pretty much anything that is supported by the JavaScript syntax highlighter that's working for us under the hood. And in this case, I'm going to put a small snippet of C code. If I save this and go back to the app, you'll see that not only do we have this code nicely marked up, it's got syntax highlighting, and we're also provided with this nice little copy to clipboard button, so that if you're writing a Streamlit app that's going to have code blocks in it, it's going to be very easy for someone using this app to just copy that code block and paste it into whatever they're working on. I think this could be quite a useful feature. Okay, so this is adding static content to an app. So far, we've basically got a glorified Markdown document running in the web browser. What we want to do now is go beyond that and add some dynamic content to it. Now, again, very straightforward using Streamlit. We have a number of widgets available, and I'll just go back over to the cheat sheet in a second to give you an overview of what those widgets are. But the important thing to remember is that when you add these widgets in Streamlit, the type that you're given back when you deploy a particular widget is normally just a standard Python type. So for instance, if you have a slider that's going to allow a user to select an integer value, when you create that slider and assign it to a variable, the variable ends up having type integer, and the value assigned to it will be the value of the slider. Similarly, if you're using a text input, you will end up with a string containing the text that was input, and so on and so forth. So back over to the cheat sheet, you'll see there's the section on display interactive widgets. And there are all sorts of things you can add. There are buttons, checkboxes, radio buttons, select boxes, drop-down menus, sliders, text inputs. There's also things like file uploader. If you wanted to allow a user to upload their own data to be processed by a script, you can use a file uploader. There is also a file downloader. So if, for instance, you wanted to do a Streamlit app that allowed a user to upload a data set, do some processing, and then download the results, that's also possible. And other things, you can select colors, you can select dates, all of these things. Now let's look at a few of those in action. The first thing I'm going to do is just add a checkbox, and it's not going to do anything yet. But if I just add a checkbox to my app back over in VS Code. So again, the syntax for this, just st streamlit.checkbox, and then the first parameter to the checkbox is the label that would be displayed. So if I save this and go back to my app, we'll see there is now a checkbox, and tick me was the label that I gave it. So I can tick it and untick it, and nothing happens at the moment because we haven't done anything with it. But going back to what I was saying, the result of these variables, or the result of these function calls, is an object typically with a standard default Python type. So a checkbox is just going to give you back a Boolean variable. So going back to the website now, we can just wrap a very simple if statement around this. So if I replace this instead with this block of code here, this is saying, give me a checkbox that has a label tick me to see. The if says, if that checkbox is ticked, then we're just going to write out the value 42. So if I save this and go back, now I'll tick this box and we have 42 printed. And if I untick this box, we don't. So it's very straightforward. The checkbox is just a Boolean variable. We can wrap it in an if statement. And based on that Boolean variable, we can display or not display a particular element in the app. Okay, nice and straightforward, tick boxes. The next thing is going to be a drop-down selection. And again, we're going to use select box. So I'll copy this in. In fact, if I just zoom in to make sure everyone can see this, we're going to use a select box. This has a number of parameters. And again, we could look up all of the optional parameters if we wanted to in the API documentation. And I certainly recommend that you do that in the next section of kind of working time. The label for this select box is going to say choose an option. We're going to have 3 different options in a Python list. And then we can say, if the selection is this third option, but something here, we're going to write a string, else we're going to write something else. So if I copy this code block, put it in my app, save it, and go back to the browser, we'll see now we have this choose an option, and I can select from nothing here, or here, but something here. And when I select this option, we now have the text that was that we asked to be displayed in that case. So tick boxes, drop-down boxes. What's next? Next is going to be sliders. So sliders, obviously for data apps, sliders are going to be quite important. This allows the user to select particular values, and there's a large amount you can do with sliders. Here we're going to look at 2, one with an integer value and one with a floating point value. So the simplest slider is going to be an integer value where we ask the user to pick an integer. We can select a minimum value, a maximum value, and the default value that the slider will start at. And then we'll just write out that value. So again, copy this into the app, save it, and go back and have a look. So what we've got here is a slider. We're printing the value 5. But if we move this slider, you'll see that that value that gets printed is going to change. So the integer slider is just a special case of the kind of full slider. And there are a number of different options. Again, you can look up what all of these different options are in the full API documentation. But if instead of giving an integer, we give a floating point value for the min and the max and the value, we can also select a step size, and we can select a printf, a C-style printf format string to determine how we want those numbers to be formatted. If I copy and paste this, we'll see what it does and how it's different to the other slider we put in. So now I have a second slider where we're now picking a float, and we go up in increments of 0.1. And we chose that format string to display 1 decimal place. We could instead change that format string to, say, %.3f. And then you see we're now going to be displaying numbers to a higher precision. So we've got now 2 sliders, an integer slider, and a floating point slider. Good. And the final section of this, before we go back out into the breakout rooms and start playing around with these things, is the layout of the app. There are lots of different ways that you might want to lay out a Streamlit app, and Streamlit provides a number of ways of doing this. But one of the main elements of a Streamlit app, one of the kind of special elements, is called the sidebar. And the sidebar is useful in a lot of apps because it's a nice place, a sort of sticky edge to the app that allows you to put things that maybe ought to be always available for the user. And the sidebar acts just as the rest of the Streamlit app, except that you prefix all of those methods with .sidebar. So all you have to do is do the st.sidebar and then whatever else you wanted to do, and it will get put in the sidebar. And if you've put anything in the sidebar, then the sidebar will exist. And if you haven't, it won't. So just to go back, let's say we wanted to put these 2 sliders in the sidebar. We're just going to add .sidebar in there and there. If I save this and now go back to the Streamlit app, you'll see we now have a sidebar on the left-hand side with these 2 sliders in. But you'll see we only put the sliders in the sidebar, so the bit of code that was printing out the values of those sliders is still in the main app window in the center of the screen, but the sliders are now in the sidebar. And the sidebar can be minimized and expanded. We have little control over this aspect of Streamlit. The sidebar is kind of a protected element that's separate, and we can choose to use it or not. If we go back over to the cheat sheet, we'll see somewhere on here, there is, lay out your app. You can group certain parts of your app together in containers. We can add columns, so we can have specific columns in the app. And so an example of how to do that is we can say col1, col2 is equal to streamlit.columns. We tell it how many columns we want. And then we can use column 1 or column 2 and add anything we like to those. So we can use col1 instead of the base streamlit.subheader. We can use col1.subheader and set other things as well. We'll see expanders later and various other bits and pieces. So the layout is pretty flexible. There are certain things that don't yet exist that are on the Streamlit roadmap. So for instance, at the moment, there is no particularly good way of giving tabbed layout. So you can't select tabs to see different things happening on the screen, but they're adding new ways of laying out your app all the time. Okay, so just to recap, going back to the website, we have started with our very basic app. We've seen how to write variables. We've seen how to write text. And we've seen that we can just use the markdown ability to display kind of richer text, as well as maths and code with syntax highlighting. And then we've seen how to add dynamic elements like checkboxes, drop-down selections, and sliders. And finally, we've had a quick demo of how we can use the built-in sidebar element to put kind of sticky things on the left-hand side of the screen that allow us to maybe control behavior of the app that we want to be fixed for the user. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing screen at this point. First of all, are there any questions about any of that so far? And if not, I'm going to open the breakout rooms again, and I'm going to suggest that we have, I think what we'll do is for this section now, let's also combine it with a coffee break. We've been going for about an hour. And let's say what I want you to do is obviously go through and have a quick play around with all of those code blocks that I've added on the website. But then also I want you to just spend a little bit of time playing around, look at the cheat sheet, look up things in the Streamlit documentation, and just have a quick play around with the kinds of things that you can really quickly add to a Streamlit app. So what I'm going to suggest is that we go in these breakout rooms to 11:20, and that will give us time to have a coffee break and hopefully have plenty of time to play around a little bit with Streamlit. So I'll open the breakout rooms, and then I'll pull people back into the main room at 11:20. And in the meantime, if anyone has any questions, please feel free. And I'm just going to go ahead and pause the recording in the main room and go and make myself a cup of coffee. So I'll be back in a couple of minutes. Just another 30 seconds for the breakout rooms to close. Okay. Well, welcome back to the main room, everyone. So hopefully you've had plenty of time to start trying things out with your Streamlit app, hopefully adding text, maths, code, sliders, and other interactive elements, maybe messing with the layout as well. Any questions at this point? Any comments, suggestions? Anything that's come up while you were doing that little exercise that thought might make a good talking point? No problem if not, but if you have anything, please let me know. No, okay, great. Well, in that case, we'll move on with the next section. And the next section is we're kind of hopefully done playing around with random features and adding random sliders and things. Let's start thinking about what we could do if we wanted to make a real app, something that's actually going to be useful. To do that, what I'm going to do, first of all, share my screen again. Okay, so I'm now sharing my screen. So this is the app as it currently exists. But we're going to go back onto the workshop website and into the next section, building something useful, subtitled Interactive Visualization of Statistical Distributions. So this is something that I worked on with a colleague a while ago. And as I was saying in the break, we created a Shiny app that allows users to basically explore different statistical distributions. And I wanted to replicate a small part of that today, just to demonstrate how quickly it is, how quickly we can get something useful up and running. So to do that, we're going to want to plot some graphs. which is something we haven't yet seen. We're going to want to just do some very minor manipulation of data. And we're going to want access to Python's own library of statistical distributions. And in order to do that, we're going to be using the following libraries. We're going to be using something called Altair for plotting. And if you've not used Altair before, don't worry. I've got all of the code snippets that we'll need to get going. This isn't a course about Altair. It's a workshop on Streamlit. So for now, if you're unfamiliar with Altair, just use the code snippets that I've provided. We'll be using NumPy and Pandas, Streamlit obviously, and we'll be using SciPy's stats module in order to deal with statistical distributions in an easy manner. Okay, so the first thing is what I want is for when users land on this app, I want in the sidebar for them to be able to select a particular statistical distribution from a drop-down menu. And then I want them to be able to set the parameters for that statistical distribution. And then I want to plot, in the first instance, the probability density function. So that's going to be the first thing, is an app where we have a selectable distribution. The user can select different parameter values for that distribution, and then they can see a plot of what the probability density function looks like. So first things first, I'm going to copy this first code block, go over into my IDE. I'm just going to remove all of this and start afresh. So first of all, actually, I'm going to copy the imports that we need. Then I'm going to copy this next box, save it, and let's just first of all go over and see what that looks like in the web browser. Okay, so now we have a sidebar with a selector that says pick a distribution. And at the moment we have normal and beta. And then over in the main app, I've just displayed a title for the app, and I've displayed the name of the currently selected distribution. So if I pick beta instead, this name here will update. So going back just to look at that code block, just to highlight a couple of things. The first is that we have, for the select box, we're putting it in the sidebar. We have a label for it. And then we have, so a select box actually can use any kind of Python iterable object. Previously, we used a list. Here, we're just using a kind of tuple. And then we can supply an index, and the index will be the particular distribution that is selected by default. So here, I think the sensible choice is to keep the distributions in the Dropbox, the drop-down menu in alphabetical order. But by selecting a particular index, we can ensure that a specific distribution is selected by default. And normal seems like a good default. And then we're just getting things set up here. So if the distribution selector is set to normal, then we're going to do something. At the moment, we're going to do nothing. But the first thing is we want to add sliders for the different parameter values. For a normal distribution, we're going to want to set the mean and the standard deviation. And we'll also allow the user to set a range that's going to be plotted. So let's go ahead and copy this code block, put that in my IDE, and instead of this pass, I'm just going to copy that in there and make sure it's indented appropriately. Save this and go back to the app. So now when we select a normal distribution, we'll see that we can select a range, a mean, and a standard deviation. And I've set some potentially sensible options for min and max for these particular sliders. But because this was in the section, if dist selector is equal to normal, then these sliders exist. If we go and drop down to beta instead, we'll see that we don't have this. So if we wanted to do something similar for beta, we'd have to look at what the parameters are for a beta distribution and what sensible ranges those parameters would take. And then we'd have to do an else part. We'd build up a sort of Python switch statement. So if it's normal, do this, else if it's beta, do this, else if it's something else, do this, and so on. You can see how that could build up. For now, we're just going to focus on the normal distribution. Okay, so we have the sliders. But the next thing is we want to actually plot what this distribution looks like. So go back to the website. I've provided a code block here. And if we just take a quick look at what's happening in this code block, I'm simply going to take the, so param range is the slider that allows the user to select the range for plotting. And so I'm going to create a NumPy array that is linearly spaced values from minus the range up to the range, and I'm going to create 400 values. And then the Y values for this are going to be from the SciPy stats norm PDF method. And I'm going to provide it X, that's our linearly spaced range. I'm going to provide it the mean that's selected from the slider and the standard deviation selected from the slider. Then we've got an X and a Y to plot, and we just need to go ahead and plot it. I'm going to be using Altair for that. And Streamlit has a built-in method, Altair chart, that allows you to interact nicely with Altair. Just jumping back over to the cheat sheet temporarily, there is a, somewhere on here, there is, display charts. So Streamlit has a number of built-in options like line chart and area chart and bar chart, but you can also interact with all sorts of things like Altair, Vega Lite, Plotly, etc. So those are built into Streamlit, so it plays well with a variety of different popular plotting methods in Python. As I say, I'm using Altair. Again, if you're not familiar with Altair, don't worry, just copy and paste this to see what happens. So I'm going to copy this, go back into my editor, paste this in, and again, editor's not very clever, so I have to re-indent things. We now should, if we go back to the app in the browser, see a PDF of a normal distribution. Okay, so first things to note here, we now have we've selected normal distribution, we have 3 sliders, so let's start playing with them. If I adjust the mean, we see that very quickly that chart is going to be redrawn, and we're going to see that moving from left to right. So if we take that back to the center, and then of course, if we change the standard deviation, we'd expect this to get more squashed out. The nice thing about Altair is we're going to get interactivity in our charts for free. So if I hover my mouse over this chart now, I can zoom in and out with the scroll wheel. I can click and drag and pan. I can download an SVG showing the initial, the current chart. So this is a nice SVG, so I can zoom in and it stays nice and crisp. I can also, the breakout rooms is in the way, one sec, sorry. I can also expand this so that the chart goes full screen. And now I'm just going to have to rearrange Zoom things to find the button again to take it back down to normal size. Okay, and so we have now the probability density function plotted. It's an interactive plot that we can pan, zoom, save screenshots of, and full screen. And I've also added tooltips, which isn't necessarily very useful for this, but hopefully this comes across on the screencast. If you hover over the line, you'll get an X and a probability density value for each of these points. Okay, so that's the probability density function. Next up is what I want to do is also plot the cumulative density function. And to do that, it's going to be almost identical. So if I go back to the website and look at the CDF, again, almost identical. So let me just copy this and pop this into the editor. Again, making sure that the indent is correct, otherwise it won't work. And now you'll see I've got the PDF and the CDF. And again, if I adjust these sliders, both of these charts are going to update, and it's very responsive. So now we've got a couple of things in the app. And at this point, I'm thinking, well, this is all very well, but it's probably unlikely. I mean, you might want to look at the PDF and the CDF next to each other, but maybe more likely, you just want to look at sort of one at a time. And so I want to give the users the option of laying out this app with just seeing the information that they want to see. And in order to do that, what I'm going to do is I want to add in each of these elements. I want them to be in its own expandable section so that the user can choose whether or not they see each particular part of the part of the app visualizations. So again, back to the website, we can now use an expander. This is one of the things in the cheat sheet for laying out the app. And we can use that with this Python construct, the with construct in Python. So all I need to do in order to get this working is, if I just copy this line here, so with streamlit.expander, and then I give it a label and whether or not it's expanded by default. Let's go over to VS Code. And what I'm going to do is in here, add this with statement, and I will need to indent back to the website, and I'll copy this other one as well for the CDF. And so the CDF, I want it expanded false by default. Let's go and pop this in here and then indent everything once. Save this, go back to the app. And now what we see is we have this expander that is by default going to show us the PDF, and I can expand or collapse this, and then I can expand or collapse the CDF plot as well. Okay, so far so good. What else can we add? Well, we want to show off Streamlit's ability to display maths and to display code blocks. So two more things that I'm just going to quickly add just to put them in for showing you what's possible. So we're going to create another Streamlit expander that's going to give us formulae related to the normal distribution. Again, going to be expanded false by default. And then I'm just going to put in some markdown that's going to display some information about it. And then I'm going to do something similar with the LaTeX, and I'll show you what that's going to look like in a minute. But for now, let's just copy this, go in here, and again, need to make sure that this is indented correctly and making sure I don't indent the raw string literal, which is why, as I say, it starts to get a little bit messy, and we'll address that in the next section of the workshop. But that's the formulae. And then let's go ahead and just copy the final part. And need to make sure this is indented the correct amount. So that needs to go in once, and then, oh no, this needs to go in once, and this needs to go back to where it was. Save this. Let's go back to the app. Okay, so now we have 4 expanders. We've seen the first 2. So the formulae, we're leveraging the fact that Markdown is first class as far as Streamlit is concerned. So we can easily add these mathematical formulae, and they get beautifully marked up for us. But then users are coming here to look at statistical distributions. They want information about them, but quite often they might be, writing a paper, writing a thesis, something like that. And so it'd be really useful if, as well as allowing people to see what the formulae are, maybe it'd be nice to provide for them a LaTeX code block that they could copy and paste into their LaTeX document so that they don't have to write out longhand the formulae for this particular distribution, which can get pretty tedious. And so I've written this other thing to provide them the LaTeX code blocks for all of these things. So if someone wanted to put the PDF formula into their LaTeX document, they just have to simply come here, click the copy, and then paste it wherever they want it. So quick recap of this section. We're kind of building up something that's going to be potentially useful. We have created a drop-down to select a statistical distribution. We've added sliders to select the appropriate parameter values, 1 for the plotting and 2 for the actual distribution. And then we've got nice interactive plots for the PDF, the CDF, nicely displayed formulae relating to the distribution, and the LaTeX copyable code blocks. And we've popped those in expanders so that users can come here and they can choose which part of this visualization they want to see. So that is the end of the kind of demo for this section. I'm going to stop sharing my screen at this point. And now what I want everyone to do is kind of go away into the breakout rooms or stay in the main room and work through this section, get the app kind of up to this state. And then I just want you to spend a few minutes either just tinkering with this, make it look slightly different, play around with other Streamlit constructs, just spend a few minutes experimenting. Or alternatively, if you'd like to give it a go, if you want to kind of try and add something to this app, then one option for that is you could perhaps go in and try and start implementing what it would look like for a beta distribution. Yeah, so that would be my suggestion for the next section. But for now, it's sort of 20 to 12. So let's have 10 minutes. So we'll say we'll come back into the main room at 11:50. And that should hopefully give you enough time to kind of play around with this and get things up and running. Are there any questions, comments, thoughts at this point? No? Okay, in that case, well, I will open the breakout rooms. Feel free to use those if you would like, or alternatively, feel free to stay here in the main room and we can kind of discuss as a group if and when anything comes up. Up to you. So with that, I'll be quiet for a few minutes, and if there are any questions, please let me know. Hi again, everyone in the main room. We've got just under sort of 5 minutes left in this little breakout session. But any kind of comments, questions, anything that's come up yet? No worries if not. Okay, I just see a question that's coming from Pete. How do you change the color of the plot? Which aspect of the plot are you trying to recolor?
I just thought I'd try a different line color.
Okay, that. Okay, so I think it would be in the block that starts with the alt.chart, where you specify the X and Y. I believe you can specify a color in there. You can also specify properties such as the type of stroke dash. If you want the line to be dotted, for instance, you can put that in there as well. So it's in that call to encode. I think you can specify a color.
Okay, yeah, got it. Okay, I'll give that a try. Thank you.
Okay, took a little bit of finding. So yeah, you'll want the color equals alt.value, and then you can specify. I think you can choose strings or other options in there as well. Okay, and in fact, we are at about 52 now, so let me just go ahead and close the breakout rooms. And we'll see everyone back here in a minute. Okay, I think everyone has rejoined from the breakout rooms. So let me just close that a sec. Okay, so yeah, hopefully now we're all in a position where we have got something that at least displays information about the normal distribution. And then potentially you've spent a few minutes looking at other things you can do, other interactive widgets, perhaps started trying to replicate the information for the beta distribution. Now, the next thing I want to talk about, I'm just going to share my screen, is the fact that at the moment, everything's working great, right? We've got a nice app. It's been very simple and straightforward to get it going. The main problem at the moment is that we've now got, so just for the normal distribution, well over 100 lines of code. And a lot of it is pretty annoying to look at. So just things like this, these raw string literals, because they have to be not indented unless you specifically want the indent to be there in the actual raw string. It's just starting to look a bit unwieldy. And particularly when we think this is all nested in an if statement, if it's the normal distribution, do all of this stuff. Those of you that have started adding the beta distribution, you'll have a similar and almost identical amount of code again. And you can imagine by the time we have, say, 20 different distributions, which would only be a small slice of all of the available distributions, then we're talking, thousands of lines of code in this one Python file. And it's going to be annoying to try and figure out whether the strings, the raw string literals, are indented properly. It's just going to get annoying. And really what we want to be able to do is keep this app.py at a high level, showing you the kind of just the flow through the code. And we want to be able to essentially delegate all of this specific functionality for the individual distributions to other files so that we can keep our app nice and simple and put all of this stuff somewhere where it's easy to maintain. And so in an ideal situation, we probably want one Python file that deals with all of this stuff to do with the normal distribution, then another one that deals with the beta distribution, another one for gamma, another for etc. And maybe you even want to break it up further. Perhaps you want to have, say, continuous univariate distributions and discrete univariate distributions, maybe with another dropdown. And then maybe you have separate modules, one for each of those. So in this next section, I just want to go through what it takes to just start breaking this code up into more manageable chunks so that the app code itself stays simple and the specific functionality ends up somewhere where it's easier to maintain and also easier to ignore once that we're happy that it works and we're happy to just sort of leave it alone and leave it in the corner. So to do that, we are in Python. We're using the Python programming language. And of course, what we can do is just utilize Python modules to put some of this code elsewhere temporarily. So let's go back to the website. If I scroll down and go to the next unit, this is keeping things clean. What we're going to do is create a Python module. And that Python module is going to be called distributions. And that distributions module is going to contain all of the normal distribution specific code. Now, this is a workshop on Streamlit, not a workshop on Python. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about how to do this. So if you're unfamiliar with some of the things we're about to do, then don't worry about it. What I think is important is hopefully by the end of this section, you'll all have a template with a working module that if you were then going to go on and build your own Streamlit apps, you could just do something very similar to that and get it working for you, whether or not you're particularly familiar with these modules. So in order to do that, in the same location as our app.py, we're going to create a directory called distributions. And in that directory, we're going to create two files. This special file that if you're familiar with Python, you will recognize, and it's going to be __init__.py. And then a second file called normal.py. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And then in the init.py, I'm just going to put this line here. Again, if you're not entirely familiar with Python, then just for this section, just copy and paste these code blocks. This is really to get up and running with Streamlit, and there's less of an emphasis on the Python. So I'm going to copy the contents of this, going to go over into my Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to create, first of all, a directory called distributions. And in distributions, I'm going to create a new file called __init__.py. Going to paste in that, save it, and then I'm going to create another file in here called normal.py. Go back to the website, and then in the normal.py file, this is going to look pretty familiar. We're going to actually have all of our different imports that we saw before. And we're going to have a single Python function. So we're going to create this function called normal distribution. And this function is going to do all of these Streamlit stuff. So we're going to have the sliders here. We're going to have our X range. We're going to have our two plots. We're going to have our formulae and our LaTeX. And the other thing I'd note here is because we've created a function now, what we can do is refer to variables for the formulae text and the LaTeX text. And those variables now can just be properly left, not indented at all. They can be over at the left. They can be at the bottom of the file. And this way, our raw string literals are a little bit less unwieldy. They're not getting in the way of, they're not sort of in already indented code, making things look a bit mucky. So I've put these text strings, raw strings, right down at the bottom of the file where they can happily live. And they're just going to be referred to by variables. And then all of a sudden, our expander is just a single call to streamlit.markdown with one of these specific variables. So very similar to what we had before. I'm just going to copy this, go back to Visual Studio Code and paste this into normal.py. Save that. So now over here, you'll see directory distributions and then two files. And I've just copied and pasted the code from the course website. Next thing to do, going back to the course website, is how does this then affect the app that we're writing? So now the entire app becomes simply this block of text here. We now only have to import Streamlit. We are going to be using some Streamlit for the sidebar, but all of the things that relied on pandas, NumPy, Altair, that is now being handled in our module called distributions. And so now we can simply add another import here. So from our module distributions, we're going to import the method normal distribution. And then in our if block here, where if the selector is equal to normal, we're just going to run this function called normal distribution. And then you can see if we're building up now, say 20 different distributions, we can just continue this with else if statements. And we're just going to be adding then for each distribution, it's going to be an if line and a function call. So now if we're doing another 20 distributions, that's only going to add 40 lines of code to this app. And then all this app is going to contain is the top level imports, whatever we want that's common across all of them. So in this case, it's going to be the drop-down menu in the sidebar. And then everything else now just becomes function calls that's going to then take us through to code that we've stored away separately and making it substantially easier to maintain. So I'm just going to copy this code block, go back to my IDE, and I'm going to go back to app.py and then just replace, press the wrong button there, copy this again, replace the entire contents of this file with that new code block, save it. And now if I've done everything correctly, if I go back to the app, it should look completely unchanged because the functionality is exactly what it was before. It's just we've now put that functionality in a place that's slightly easier to maintain. Okay, so everything is still working. So now I'm just going to give you, stop sharing screen, and I'm just going to give everyone a couple of minutes to just run through that and hopefully get up to the point where the app is working again with this change. And that should make everything a lot kind of clearer and easier. And as I say, what I want is for this to be a template so that if you're going to build your own Streamlit app, you can work on this template and you'll be able to simplify the app code and keep all of the other bits in separate files. So a couple of minutes, I'll open the breakout rooms again if people would like to use them, but no obligation. Go through and make that module. And then the other thing that's going to be really important before we get onto the final step for the workshop is once you've got the app working again, please add and commit those changes to Git and push them to GitHub. We're going to need the app in all of its glory available on GitHub. So please remember to commit and push those changes. Okay, and I'll just give sort of 3 or 4 minutes for this section. Hopefully it's just going to be a case of copying and pasting things from the website. But yeah, off you go. And I'll see you at, say, 8 minutes past 12. sorry, I'm muted. Hopefully you can hear me now. Okay, so hopefully everyone's got up to the point of being able to take all their functionality and put it somewhere else where it's more maintainable. Any comments, questions, thoughts about this most recent section? No? Okay, great. Well, in that case, what we're going to do now is just get straight on with the final section, which is how to actually distribute this app. We want to put it somewhere so that the world can see it. And fortunately, that's also very easy with Streamlit. So again, I'm going to share my screen. And I'm going to go back to the workshop website and go to the next section on deploying a Streamlit app. We are going to be using Heroku. However, there are a number of different options. So the best option is unfortunately not available to us all today, at least not in workshop form. Streamlit has their own service called Streamlit Cloud. And, oh, sorry, that was the deployment. That was the wrong link on that one, unfortunately. But we can get to the deployment. If you go to your Streamlit app and click the three little lines there, there is an option to deploy this app. That will take you through to a Streamlit Cloud login page. And Streamlit Cloud allows you to deploy your apps for free. Unfortunately, at the moment, Streamlit Cloud is in a kind of closed or semi-closed beta, which means that you have to apply for an invitation to be able to use it. Now, I have that invitation, so I can deploy Streamlit apps for free using Streamlit's own cloud service. And of course, if you're using Streamlit's own cloud service, it's completely seamless and you have to set up absolutely nothing. It just works magically. But unfortunately, I certainly can't guarantee that everyone would be able to get the invite in time for the workshop. It took me several weeks to get mine. And so what we're going to do is look at another option. That said, there are many options, and Streamlit actually, despite offering their own service for this, they have this page on their, they have a wiki with information about how to deploy Streamlit apps to a number of different places. So for instance, you can deploy to Alibaba, to Amazon Web Services, to Google, etc. You can also, some people have found a way of deploying them to Google Colab pages. We today are going to use Heroku, and it's going to be very simple and straightforward to do that. So going back to this workshop webpage, we'll be using Heroku. And in order to use Heroku, we're just going to need to add two very simple configuration files. So I'm just going to go ahead and add those to my repository. So first of all, we need a setup.sh. So I'm going to go back over to VS Code. And again, in the top level directory, we're going to create a new file called setup.sh. And in there, we're just going to copy and paste these two lines. Don't need to worry about what they do. Obviously, you can look into it in your own time if you're interested. But for today, this will be sufficient. So we need a setup.sh and we need a file called procfile. So again, we're going to create another new file called procfile. And we're going to put this command in here. All done. So all I'm going to do now is commit those. So I'm going to git add all git commit with the message add Heroku files. And then importantly, I'm going to git push those changes up to GitHub. It's important at this stage that we have everything, including our app and those two files available in GitHub. So I'm just going to double check that. If I go back over to my Streamlit workshop GitHub repository, I can see indeed that I've got now the proc file and the setup.sh available. Now we're going to go through the process of deploying an app, a Streamlit app to Heroku, which is fortunately extremely easy. And I've left an 8-step guide on how to do that. And the first thing is to log into the Heroku dashboard. we should all hopefully have a Heroku app signed in. Here's the test one I did preparing for this workshop, but I'm just going to walk you through it, which is very straightforward. So we're going to click New and create new app and app name. Now this has to be a unique app name. So I'm going to call something like Streamlit Workshop and then Fergus, something to identify me. And this will actually be part of the URL of the eventual app. So obviously, if you're doing this for real, you probably want to pick a nice, unique name that's meaningful. Choose a region just to get slightly lower latency on the app. We'll pick Europe, and I'm going to press Create App. Now on deployment method, there are a number of different ways that you can do it. The easiest, in my opinion, is to just connect it to GitHub. So here we connect to GitHub. Now, if it's the first time that you have done this on Heroku, you'll just have to authorize access to your GitHub. You can choose from your own repositories or any other repository that has already been given permission. And if you need to do that, it gives you a handy link here so that you can choose whether or not to add permissions for Heroku to any particular organizations on GitHub that you're a part of. And then I'm going to search for my app, which I think was called, just Streamlit-Workshop. Press search. And yep, it's found it. So that's my GitHub username /Streamlit Workshop. And I click connect. And then we have a couple of options here. What we can do is set up automatic deploys. And this is integrated with GitHub in the sense that every time you push new changes to, in this case, the main branch, it will automatically redeploy the app for you. So it's really simple as that. So I'm going to click Enable Automatic Deploys. But because it's the first time, we could at this point now just push something to the main branch and it would automatically deploy it. But because this is the first time, we may as well do a manual deploy as well. So we're going to deploy from the main branch. And what we will see is it's received the code from GitHub, and you'll see here a little log saying that it's being built. So it's installing pip setup tools and wheels. And then it's going to go through and find all of our information from the requirements.txt. So you'll see it's getting Altair and it's getting other things. And this should just take a minute. So we'll just sit here and watch for this to finish. Well, we're just waiting for this deployment to finish. If anyone has any kind of questions or comments at this point, then please feel free to fire those off. Okay, thanks, Jez, for the tip. If you leave the app name blank, it will apparently generate something suitably random for you. That's useful to know. Okay, it looks as though it has succeeded in doing something, and hopefully in a second, it looks as though it has finished and it's given us a URL to go to, but I think in a second, we will get a button to click. Let's give this another couple of minutes. Here we go, loading output. So your app was successfully deployed, and then we can just click View, and that will open up the app in our browser. And again, now we've got exactly what we had running locally, but now we are live at this web address. So if I just copy and paste that URL into the chat, hopefully you can all go to that. And you'll see that despite this being on the Heroku free tier, it is actually nonetheless very responsive. So if I move these sliders, these graphs get updated really straight away. So despite this being a free tier thing, it's very, very snappy and responsive. I was actually very, very impressed the first time I used Heroku for this purpose. But anyway, that is the very quick overview of how to deploy a Streamlit app to Heroku using the free tier. And yeah, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen at this point. And I'm going to suggest that everyone just goes away and runs through those steps and just check that you can, without any problems, get your app up and running. And we'll just take a few minutes for that, and then we'll kind of gather for a bit of a wrap up. So we'll go, say, to 12:25. I think that should give people enough time to hopefully run through those steps. And then at 12:25, we'll have a bit of a wrap up and a discussion if anyone's interested in that. So I'll open the breakout rooms again, or stay here if you prefer, and we'll reconvene in a few minutes' time. Any comments or questions at this point? Feel free. How is everyone getting on? Anyone run into any problems yet with this, or is it all working as expected so far? Okay, interesting couple of comments. So Martin has said that it seems to be working from a private repo, which is interesting. Okay, I might have been slightly confused. It may be the Streamlit own hosting service that requires your app to be public. That is very possible. Heroku might still allow that on the free tier, which is very good to know, very useful. So thanks for that comment, Martin. And yeah, Magnus has the same comment. Okay, well, that's useful to know. Thanks for pointing that out, both. Okay, well, it certainly sounds as though at least some people have got to the point of getting it up and running with Heroku. So Martin and Magnus, since you've obviously been doing that, have you managed? Is yours live now? Oh, you've got yours. Yeah, you put a link. Perfect. Yeah, looks great. In that case, I think I will close the breakout rooms for the final time, and then everyone will come back shortly. I think we're just waiting for Jez at this point, who's still in one of the breakout rooms. But he'll be back in a few seconds. Okay, well, welcome back to the main room, everyone. So just a quick wrap up. So that's pretty much the end of the workshop. That's all I wanted to go through today. So just a very quick recap of what we've done. Hopefully, in the last 2 and a bit hours, we've been able to go through from a completely blank GitHub repository, and we've been able to build a, hopefully, something that is a prototype of a useful visualization app for statistical distributions. And we've got all the way through to hosting it using Heroku's free tier. And we've ended up with a nice interactive, pretty responsive web app. And we've built it up from a simple Python file using Streamlit. And so hopefully what this demonstrates is that Streamlit really gives you an incredibly easy way of doing a kind of quick visualization of data, or a quick pipeline to demonstrate how maybe you and your research are processing some data or whatever it is. If you can do it in Python, you can add it to a Streamlit app. And it's very, very straightforward to get that app deployed and available to the world. It really is something you can do in an afternoon. Make something available, say, to your collaborators, or you just want to show off some of the research you've been doing. And great, it looks like Jez has got up and running as well. Fantastic. So yeah, that is all I wanted to cover today, but I'm happy to stick around and sort of discuss or answer any questions or comments. So yeah, feel free to kind of stick around and sort of ask anything or say anything. But otherwise, thanks very much for coming to the workshop. Hope you've enjoyed it and hope you've found it useful, and possibly see you later in the month in the Gather Town.
Thank you.
No, it's really cool. Cheers.
Well, thank you, everyone. In that case, I think I will stop the recording at this point.